Well, if you will, we are continuing a series that we started several weeks ago now on the fruit of the Spirit. We entitled that series, Peeled. When we are peeled back, what fruit is revealed in our lives? As we are peeled open, what fruit is revealed in our lives? So turn, if you will, to Galatians chapter 5. We've begun every single sermon with these verses, and I'm going to continue to do it, and then we're going to move on. As I said when I started this series, I wanted to look at this very differently. So what we've done is we've looked at different places in the Bible where the word fruit is mentioned. And then we've found fruit of the Spirit that coincides with those verses, that works with those verses. So we want to look this morning at Galatians 5 and 22. This morning, the fruit of the Spirit we're looking at is patience. This morning is patience. A lot of my translation actually will say long-suffering. Many of your translations may say long-suffering as well. But I use the more relevant, the more contemporary word, which is patience. So this morning we want to look at the fruit of the Spirit of patience. We looked at love, joy, peace, and now patience. So if you will, Galatians 5 and verse 22. Galatians 5 and 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering or patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such, there is no law. Now, if you will, turn over a little bit to James chapter 5 and verse 8. This is where we're going to spend the majority of our time this morning, is in James chapter 5. Just a few chapters over in the New Testament, James chapter 5 and verse 8. I'm just going to read the first part of it. James says this, "You also be patient. Establish your hearts. Establish your hearts. You also be patient. Establish your hearts." Let's pray. God, I ask in the next few moments that you will speak to us about this most vital of fruit, patience. Could show us, teach us, speak to us about patience. We long to hear from you this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I worked for a long time before I was working at a local church. I worked for a long time for my dad's missions organization, Global Servants. Global Servants has a work in Thailand. It has a work in West Africa. And I continued to help my dad with that ministry some part-time. But for about 12 years, I worked full-time for Global Servants. And in addition to doing things overseas, one of the things that I did was I handled all the domestic stuff. I was the chief of operations, so I oversaw all of our domestic things. And a lot of the ways that we raised money to fund our overseas ministry was by selling things here in the States. So we sold copies of my dad's books. We sold copies of his sermons. He would go and do conferences. You know, all these different things that we would do to generate money that we could then spend overseas. So my dad was and still is on the radio here in Atlanta. He's on 91.5 from 12:30 to 1. So if you ever want to check that out, he's still on 91.5, 12:30 to 1 o'clock. I do not have a radio ministry yet, but I will one day. So, and I'll be on from 12 to 12:30, so I'll be on before him. But regardless, he is still on from 12:30 to 1. And so every day, Monday through Friday, about 1 o'clock, the phone would start ringing in the office, and people would want to order copies of the message that had been on the radio for that day. And I remember one time my dad was doing a series on the radio called Dealing with Life's Issues, different issues in life, dealing with this, dealing with that. One of the sermons he spoke on was dealing with delay. Dealing with, not getting it as soon as you wanted it, not getting it as quickly as you wanted it, dealing with delay. And this guy called up. He said, "Hey, I want today's message on delay." I said, "Great, no problem." I said, "Would you like to order it over the phone with a credit card, or would you like to mail us a check and then we'll mail you a CD? And he said, "Oh, I guess I'll just mail you a check." I said, "Okay, that's fine, no problem." I said, "Let me give you the address." I gave him the address, told him who to make the check payable to. I said, "All right, we'll mail it to you as soon as we get your payment." Hung the phone up. About a minute later, the phone rang again, and it was that same guy. And he said, "Yeah, I've been thinking about it, and I can't wait to get that CD. I have to have it right now." A CD that was about dealing with delay, okay? He did not find the humor in that either. I started laughing, and he was like, "What are you laughing about?" And I was like, "Well, you can't wait to get a sermon that teaches you how to wait." And he did not find that humorous at all. Regardless, I thought it was hilarious. And I've never forgotten it, that this guy couldn't wait to get a sermon about how to wait. But that's what so many of us do when we're talking about the idea or the concept of patience. It always is, if you Google how to be more patient, it's always about, when somebody in your office is driving you crazy, you do breathing exercises and you clear your mind, you close the door and you count to 100, all these things. And like I said, as I wanted to teach this series on the fruit of the Spirit, I didn't want it to turn into a self-help seminar where I'm like Tony Robbins up here teaching everybody how to be more patient. Because that's not what the goal is. That's not what we're looking for. It's not about taking breaths and doing yoga meditation in your office so that your coworker, it doesn't drive you crazy anymore. We're looking at the biblical idea of patience. That's what we want to look at. So what does that look like? How does that work for us? Look, if you will, at what we talked about just in James. So back to James chapter 5. This time I want to go back one verse and start with verse 7. James chapter 5 and verse 7. Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. All right. For those of you who are taking notes, and I don't know that all of you do or all of you are, but I want to give you this. Those three words is the key to patience. We're going to talk about how patience is cultivated in our lives, but those three words is the key. Establish your hearts. Establish your hearts. Some of your translation may read strengthen. Strengthen your hearts. Why does James tell us that? Why does James tell us to strengthen our hearts, to establish our hearts? It is because of this. What he's about to tell us about how to cultivate patience is not going to be easy to hear. It's not going to be fun to hear, and it's not going to be fun or easy to do. So James is warning us ahead of time, strengthen your heart, establish your heart, because how I'm about to tell you to be more patient is not going to be fun or easy to do. So establish your heart. In what? In hope. That's the key. Establish your heart in hope. Strengthen your heart in hope. There's a great scene in a great movie that I've mentioned before. One of my favorite movies of all time is Cool Hand Luke. And there's a great scene in Cool Hand Luke where Luke continues to escape. He's a part of a chain gang. And he lives in this prison camp, and he continues to escape from this prison camp. And finally, they call him captain. The captain of this prison camp comes out and he says, Luke, we're going to get your mind right. He says, Luke, we're going to get your mind right. I want you to understand, what we're about to talk about in cultivating patience is not easy. So I want you to establish your heart. I want you to get your mind right, because it's not going to be fun or easy, but it is necessary if we want to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit, which is patience. So establish your heart. Now, let's go back to James 5 and verse 7. Therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. The first thing in cultivating patience in your life is that patience requires uncertainty. Patience requires uncertainty. See, here's the problem. What we want is for God to teach us patience in a vacuum. What we want is for God to teach us patience. But God says, no, establish your heart. Because how you learn patience is through difficulty. How you learn patience is through these three things we're about to look at. And the first of them is uncertainty. Verse 8, you also be patient, establish your heart, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. For the coming of the Lord is at hand. Christians should be the most hopeful and patient people in the world. And instead, we've become an entire community of Chicken Little. The sky is falling, the sky is falling. I can't tell you the number of people that rush up to me or send me emails or want to talk to me afterwards about some computer in Europe that has everybody's social security numbers, and the name of the computer is the beast. Oh. Or they were digging in Australia and they dug too deep and they a little portal, a hole, and they heard screaming coming out. Give me a break. You don't actually think hell is in Australia, do you? That's not real. Do you understand that? But Christians are the most freaked out, scared, worried, nervous people in the entire world. We're just always, did you hear about this? Did you hear this? Oh, they passed this law. Oh, this person's about to get elected president. Oh, this is going to happen in the Supreme Court. This is happening in Europe. This is da-da-da. Listen to me. Patience requires uncertainty. It requires uncertainty because we don't have to be uncertain. Because we have hope. We have hope. Turn, if you will, to Romans. The other place we're going to be in is Romans and James. Romans chapter 8 and verse 25. Romans 8 and 25. It says this. Romans 8 and 25. But if we hope for what we do not see, we eagerly wait for it with perseverance or with patience. Some of your translations are going to say patience. But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. That is the key. People are often freaked out and confused and don't understand the book of Revelation, which can be a confusing book. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to break it down for you on how the Bible ends and begins, or begins and ends. It starts, God is life. It ends, God is life. All the rest of it in between, unfortunately, that's where we live. And we live in that uncertainty. But what we cling to is the knowledge that the book ends the same way it begins. And it ends with God is life. Our youngest son, Liam, he's 7. He has a Lego Bible. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but all the scenes of the Bible are acted out with Lego pieces. It's a fascinating little thing. It's a Lego Bible, and it's different. It's all the Bible with pictures of Lego people, persons dressed up, animals, the whole thing. The other day, he grabbed his Lego Bible, and he said, me and Courtney were sitting on the couch, and he said to us, I'm going to read this book. I said, okay, that's great. He said, but I'm going to skip to the end. I like how this book ends. Listen to me. I like how this book ends too. I like how this book ends. You don't have to deal. Ooh. That's it. That's all I got. That's it. Sending everybody home. Did you see that? That was amazing. Snatched that thing out of the air like a ninja. All right. Listen to me. I like how this book ends too, because here's the deal. What happens is we get all freaked out about the uncertainty. We get all freaked out about, well, what does the seventh toe on the foot of the beast mean? What's the little kingdoms mean? What's the stuff mean? What's all this? How does it ends with God is life. God is life. The uncertainty is not bad. It is in the uncertainty that patience is built. The only way that you can cultivate more patience is by asking God for hope to get you through the uncertain times. People get elected, presidents, governments, terrorist groups, they rise and they fall. And what we want is to live in a perfect little bubble. That's not how patience is built. The fruit of the Spirit, which is patience, is cultivated only through times of uncertainty. It's only cultivated through times when we don't understand it, don't know what's going on, don't fully grasp it, can't explain it, times that are scary, times that make us nervous. But that is when patience is built. Because listen to me, I like how this book ends. Because it ends with God is life. Don't be concerned and worried about times of uncertainty. In times of uncertainty, let God, through hope, build your patience. Now, the second thing is this. Look back at James chapter 5. James 5, verse 9. James says, do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. The second not fun thing that patience requires is that patience requires others. Patience requires others. This one is really frustrating because what we pray for, what we ask is, God, give me patience. Give me patience so I can deal with annoying coworkers, frustrating family members, these things. Give me patience to deal with these other people. And God's answer to us is, the patience you require is found in dealing with the other people. You understand? That's why he told us before all of this, establish your heart. Because see, that's what I said. Building patience isn't fun. It isn't easy. He said, give me more patience so I can deal with that difficult person. And God says, deal with the difficult person first. And in dealing with them, you will get more patience. But we don't like how that cause and effect works. Courtney and I went on a little couple of days away. We just went down into Atlanta to a little bed and breakfast, and we just hung out for the last couple of days. We got back yesterday. Just took a couple of days away from our kids, and we did that. Went to a bread and breakfast. It was wonderful. One of the days, I had done this years ago when I was a little boy. My mom had taken us there, and so I told Courtney, I said it might be fun to go back and just kind of walk around and see it. So we went out to the monastery that's in Conyers, Georgia. I grew up in Conyers, so we used to go to the monastery all the time, but I haven't been back in 30 years probably. So we went back to the monastery, and it's unbelievable. Those guys, monks, I guess, those monks, they built a gift shop, and they got a store, and they're selling, they're making sandwiches, and these guys it's impressive. So we walked around, and we bought some fudge, of course. That's monk fudge. So it was good. That's like homemade. It is. I'm not making that up. It's on the box. It says monk fudge. So that's homemade monk fudge. So we bought some fudge and we bought some bread, and we walked around and we saw their bonsai garden, and we went through their little museum. We saw where they lived and everything else. And it is beautiful and wonderful. And that's a fun day by the side, just on the side. That's a fun thing to do. But as we were walking around, Courtney and I were both talking. And here's the only thing or issue that I have with monasteries. I cannot find any reference that is how Jesus did his ministry, or that is how Jesus calls us to do ministry. There's no place. What is the Great Commission? Go into that corner and build yourself a house and put a wall around it and stay right there until I come back. That's not what Jesus says at all. He says, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. And I'm not saying monks are wrong or monasteries are wrong. If you're hearing that, you're hearing the wrong thing. What I'm saying is that the ministry of Jesus was about the multitudes. It says, and Jesus saw the crowds and he was moved with compassion for them. Jesus was part of the people, and they pulled on him. We need a miracle. We need this. Please touch us, heal us, feed us. Raise my daughter from the dead. Raise my son from the dead. We need you, Jesus. And Jesus was in and part of the people all the time. You don't cultivate patience by locking yourself away in a monastery. You cultivate patience by being in the middle of the crowd that can be annoying, the crowd that can be frustrating, the crowd that can be just overwhelming. But patience requires others. You have to have uncertainty to build patience. You also have to have others. Look, if you will, at Romans 15:5. As I said, we were going to look at Romans. Romans 15:5. Paul says this, now may the God of patience and comfort. I want you to see that. That says the God. That means he is the God of whatever. And Paul says God is the God of patience and comfort. Now may the God of patience and comfort grant you to be like-minded toward one another. Like-minded toward one another how? In patience and comfort. If he's the God of patience and comfort, he's telling us, I want you to be just like me in your dealings with one another. You want more patience? It requires having people in your life. What you can't do is go away and get filled up with patience and then come back and deal with all these frustrating people. It is in dealing with the frustrating people that the patience is built. So patience requires uncertainty, and patience requires others. Now look, if you will, back to James one final time. James chapter 5 and verse 10. James 5 and 10. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You have heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. Look again at verse 10. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. The final thing that patience requires is tribulation. Put whatever word in you want there. Difficulty, hardship, pain, whatever it is. But patience requires tribulation. The prophets are an example of suffering and patience. The reason that they were an example of patience is because they learned patience, they built patience, they cultivated patience in those times of suffering. That is the most difficult thing to teach and talk about, preach on, because it's the most frustrating thing. Why do good things happen to bad people? Why does suffering happen? Why does pain happen to people that we care about and people that love God? It's so hard to explain that, to talk about that, because honestly, that wasn't the plan. The plan that God had for all of us was a perfect and sinless world. But humanity has messed that up. And so now we live in a fallen universe. So one day, eventually, God will make it perfect. God will take away all the tribulation and all the suffering and all the pain and all the hardship. But God doesn't do anything halfway. So when he takes the pain away, when he makes things perfect, he makes it all perfect. And there are days when I say, okay, God, I'm ready for you to make everything perfect. And then I think about all the people that I care about that don't know God. And I think about all the people that I love that don't have a relationship with Jesus. And I say, okay, I do want it made perfect. I do want there to be no more suffering. I do want there to be no more hardship. But on the other hand, I want to wait just one more day because I love those people so much that I don't want them to miss out on the perfection. And so that's what we have to do is in those moments of tribulation, we have to trust in a sovereign God that he knows what he's doing more than we know. We have to turn over our suffering and hardship and pain and tribulation to him, because it is in those times of difficulty that patience is cultivated. What we want is for patience to be cultivated outside of suffering. But look at what it says. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. You cannot learn patience without suffering. You cannot cultivate patience without tribulation. You cannot cultivate patience without difficulty and hardship. They go hand in hand. Look, if you will, at Romans chapter 5. As I said, we're going to be in Romans. Romans 5, verses 3 and 4. Romans 5, 3 and 4. Paul says this, and not only that, but we also glory in tribulation. Why do we glory in tribulation? Because tribulation produces perseverance or patience. And patience or perseverance produces character. And character produces hope. We glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance or patience. Patience produces character. Character produces hope. I don't like tribulation. I don't like suffering. I don't like people that I love in pain. But what we have to hold on to is that God is sovereign. And the moments of tribulation produce patience. Do you remember the old Greek fable or story about Pandora's box. You remember Pandora is given a box and says not to open. Don't open this no matter what. But she can't leave it alone. She continues to obsess. What's in that box? Why can't I open it? What's in the box? What's in the box? And finally, Pandora goes over to it and opens the box. And all the evil of the world comes flooding out. Sickness, disease, death, pain, suffering, tribulation. It comes pouring out of the box, and she can't get the lid down. And finally she closes the lid. But all of human suffering has escaped from that box. And she says, what in the world am I going to do? And then she hears something in the box one more time. And with fear and trepidation, she cracks the box open and looks in. And at the bottom, there's one thing left in that box, and it's hope. There's one thing left in Pandora's box, and that's hope. Listen to me. Hope in God is what gets us through seasons of suffering. And seasons of suffering is what produces patience. And patience produces character, and character produces hope. And the whole thing is a cycle. You have hope, it gets you through tribulation. You get through tribulation, you get patience, you get more patience, you get character. Character produces hope, and the hope gets you through the next season of tribulation. But cultivating patience doesn't mean living locked away from everybody else. Patience cultivated requires tribulation. Let me close with this. As you know, I always talk about movies. Often I talk about movies that I like, movies that I love. One movie I don't talk about very much because I like it a lot, but I also, I could talk about it all the time, so I try and temper it. But one of my favorite movies, and definitely my wife's favorite movies, is the Star Wars universe. There are numerous films now and whatnot. Used to be able to say the Star Wars trilogy, and then they made 3 more, and then they made another one last year, so it's become a universe of Star Wars films. But the most famous are the first 3. A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi. Those are the 3 famous ones. In the second movie, the smuggler Han Solo is captured, and they've decided that they're going to freeze Han Solo and take him to a bad guy. And he's frozen in carbonite. So he's still alive, but he's frozen. And they're just about to freeze him. And he's probably never going to see any of his friends again. And his girlfriend, lady friend, whatever she is at that point in the films, Princess Leia comes up to him. And she says, I love you. And because Han Solo is the coolest dude in the universe, he tells her, I know. Oh, she says, I love you. And he says, I know. And then they drop him in that carbonite and he's frozen. And he comes out and you can just see this part of his face and his hands. And he's frozen in this carbonite. And they take him away to the bad guy's headquarters. That is how so many of us want patience to be cultivated. We want to be frozen in suspended animation and let God pump patience in. And then when we're patient enough, God unfreezes us and looses us on the world. And then people come up to us and they don't bother us at all because we've been in suspended animation and we've been pumped full of patience and we're fine. And tribulation comes against us and we've got patience to overcome that. And uncertainty comes. We don't know what the world's doing and what the politicians are doing and what governments are doing. But we're okay because we've had 20 years frozen in carbonite. And so we got all the patience we need when we were frozen in carbonite. So we don't have to worry about all the rest of this stuff. And that's how we want patience to be manifested in us. We want to lock ourselves away in a spiritual monastery and learn patience. And then come out and change the world. But that's not how it works. James says, establish your hearts. Strengthen your hearts in hope. Because this is going to be the toughest thing you ever do. And we say, God, teach us patience so that we're patient when the political systems of the world don't seem to be working the way we want them to work. Give us patience. And God says, you learn patience when the systems of the world aren't working the way you want them to work. And you say, God, give me patience to deal with my brother-in-law. He's driving me crazy. My coworker, I think I want to kill her, God. I'm serious. I think I want to kill my coworker. Give me patience. And God says the patience that you require can only be learned by dealing with the coworker and not killing her. That's a good one too. Not killing her is how you learn patience. And God says, and then we say, God, I can't deal with this pain. People that I love are suffering. I'm dealing with tribulation. I'm dealing with hardship. I'm dealing with difficulty. Give me patience to overcome it. And God says the patience you require is only learned in the season of difficulty that you're in. The prophets were examples of suffering and patience. We cannot freeze ourselves, lock ourselves away, go away, suspended animation, move away, get away from everything and learn this stuff and then come back. The only way that you can learn to deal with the world around you is by establishing your heart in hope. And the way that you cultivate patience is through stuff we don't like. We cultivate patience through uncertainty, through others, and through tribulation.